My name is Emily Morgan, and I am 32 years old. Although I built a thriving career in finance, I never quite felt good enough for my father. The yearly family reunion dinner was coming up, and this time I feared it more than ever before. I had bought him an extravagant car as a gesture of reconciliation, hoping this year would be different. Little did I realize that inside my purse was a document that would alter everything. By the end of the evening, I would finally understand why my father never seemed to love me. Before I reveal my story, please tell me where you are watching from and press the like and subscribe buttons if you have ever stood your ground against someone who refused to recognize your value. Believe me, my story might inspire you to find that courage within. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Boston, our family looked flawless to outsiders, but behind the scenes, things were much more complicated. My father, Robert Morgan, transformed his real estate development business from humble beginnings into a multi-million dollar empire. He prized achievement, reputation, and respect above all else, including family bonds. From my earliest recollections, he was never the kind of dad who came to school events or helped with assignments. Instead, he was the severe judge who insisted my B-plus grades should have been A's, who asked why I was never chosen as team captain, who constantly reminded me that second place was nothing but the first loser. My mother, Catherine, was quite different in many respects, warm and nurturing. He was warm and loving when he was not present, but she transformed completely in his company, almost retreating into herself, never challenging him, never defending us kids when his judgments went too far. It was a dynamic I only began to grasp much later, the strange hold he had over her, how her eyes would flicker to him before she responded even to the simplest questions about dinner plans or weekend arrangements. My siblings and I grew up inside this complex family pattern. My older brother Jason was 3 years older than me and undeniably the favored child. He played football, earned high honors, dated the right girls from respected families, and eventually followed our father into the real estate business after graduating from our father's alma mater. Everything seemed easy for Jason, or at least that is how it appeared to me. He seemed to instinctively grasp what would satisfy our father, while I constantly made the wrong choices. My younger sister, Sarah, 2 years younger than me, somehow managed to navigate the confusing rules of our father's approval better than I ever could. She was not the high achiever Jason was, but she possessed a natural charm and an almost magical intuition for when to speak and when to blend into the background. She became the family peacemaker, the one who could occasionally make father smile when his mood turned dark, the one who would slip into my room after especially harsh criticism to reassure me that it was not the end of the world. Things were not as difficult as they appeared, but for me, nothing ever seemed sufficient. I graduated first in my high school class and earned a full academic scholarship to Cornell. However, my father insisted I attend his alma mater instead, interpreting my choice as a rejection of his legacy. During college, I balanced two part-time jobs while keeping a strong GPA. Yet, on breaks, he would criticize why I wasn't securing internships at more prestigious companies. After graduation, I declined his lukewarm offer to join his firm because I knew I would never be seen as more than a pity hire. Instead, I moved to New York City with just 2 suitcases and a fierce determination, couch surfing at a friend's place while submitting applications to every financial institution I could find. Finally, I secured an entry-level role at Goldman Sachs. His reaction was, "Let's see if you can last a month." I not only lasted a month, but stayed for 8 years, steadily climbing the ranks without help from family ties or nepotism. My drive was fueled partly by passion and partly by a desperate desire to prove him wrong. Just last month, I earned a significant promotion to senior investment strategist, becoming the youngest person ever to hold that position in the company's history. The increase in salary was considerable, enabling me to buy my dream apartment in Manhattan and still set aside savings. With these savings, I made what I believed would be a meaningful gesture, purchasing a brand new Mercedes S Class for my father. For Father's Day, in my imagination, this present would finally make him recognize me as accomplished and deserving of his approval. The car cost almost a full year's salary, yet I convinced myself it was worth it to finally hear him say he was proud of me. Looking back now, I realize how desperate that craving for validation was, how it influenced every major choice I made. My successes were never truly for myself, but served as tools in a hopeless battle for his affection. When I purchased that car, I was not merely acquiring a luxury vehicle, I was attempting to obtain what every child should receive naturally, a parent's unconditional love. The Morgan family's annual reunion always took place on the last weekend of June, conveniently near Father's Day, so the event also served to honor Robert Morgan's role as head of the family. This year would be no different, except I had decided to make a statement by buying that outrageously expensive luxury car, a sleek black Mercedes S Class, loaded with every premium feature Father had once admired at a friend's country club estate. As the date drew closer, my anxiety soared. I spent 3 weekends searching for the ideal outfit, something that proclaimed success without seeming too forced feminine, without appearing superficial, the conflicting balance my father seemed to demand from businesswomen. I finally chose a navy tailored dress from a designer my mother said he respected paired with understated gold accessories and pricey shoes. Though not extravagant, the familiar ritual of getting ready seemed almost pitiful even as I took part in it. The desperate pattern of a 32-year-old still craving approval flashed through my memory at past family gatherings, each one marked by some kind of paternal disappointment. When I was 16 and won the state mathematics competition, he asked why I did not concentrate more on debate, since numbers are easy to manipulate. Upon graduating college, summa cum laude, his sole remark was that my chosen career path was unstable compared to real estate. My first bonus at Goldman Sachs prompted him to speculate aloud whether finance was merely sophisticated gambling, and my initial promotion resulted in doubts if I had been chosen to satisfy a gender quota. Nothing I achieved was ever seen as merit-based, it was always overshadowed by his skepticism. This year brought a further complication, one that shattered the core of my identity just 3 months earlier. A widely used genetic testing company, one I had relied on merely to learn about my heritage, uncovered something unexpected. The genetic markers did not match those of being Robert Morgan's biological daughter. After the stunned disbelief, I discreetly arranged for a more accurate test gathering DNA samples from my father's hairbrush during a brief trip home. The results were definitive and now rested inside a sealed envelope in my handbag, a drastic measure I was yet undecided whether to act upon. This revelation clarified so much about my whole life experience. Feeling like a stranger within my own family, the subtle physical differences that no one seemed to notice, and the mysterious coldness from a man who at least showed some affection to his other children. I suspected he had always known the truth, and that knowledge had affected every moment we had ever shared. The day before the family gathering, I drove the new Mercedes to my parents' house in the Boston suburbs. I had arranged for the car to be sent to a nearby dealership and planned the presentation carefully. Arriving in the late afternoon, knowing my mother would be at her garden club meeting, I ensured I would have a private moment. My father opened the door dressed in his usual neat business casual clothes, even though it was a Saturday. He seemed mildly irritated by the unexpected visit. "Emily, you are early. The reunion is tomorrow," he said while checking his watch as if I had forgotten something important. "I know, Dad. I actually brought your Father's Day present ahead of time and wanted to give it to you alone, I answered nervously, handing him a small box that held a car key showing the Mercedes emblem. He took it with his usual polite but distant attitude, reserved for obligatory gifts. Then his expression changed to surprise as he recognized the symbol. Is this some kind of joke? He asked, and I led him to the front window where the brand new car shone in the driveway. His face showed true astonishment, followed by a brief glimpse of pleasure, which quickly disappeared, replaced by his usual cold, analytical stare. This is over the top, Emily. What exactly are you trying to demonstrate? He asked as he moved toward the front door, key in hand. Nothing, I lied. I just got a big promotion and wanted to surprise you. He circled the car twice, inspecting it as if evaluating a real estate investment, pointing out features and grilling me about financing and insurance. His questions felt more like an interrogation than gratitude. After a short test drive during which he remarked on the steering being somewhat loose despite the car's well-known handling, he parked it inside the garage instead of leaving it visible in the driveway where visitors could see. His thanks were brief and followed immediately by a remark that I must be doing well to afford such extravagance, which instantly took away the joy of my generous gesture. That evening, I called my closest friend Taylor from my hotel room, struggling to avoid tears as I described the cold response. You know what? Forget him, Taylor said with the fierce anger of someone who had heard too many stories like mine. Return the car. He does not deserve it. I rejected the advice, still holding out hope that the next day would be different, that in front of others he might show some appreciation, might finally acknowledge me. Just promise me you won't show him the test, Taylor warned before hanging up. Not unless you are ready for a nuclear fallout. I promised, but the envelope stayed tucked away in my purse, kept as a secret. The weapon I both feared and struggled to let go of Sunday afternoon arrived with flawless June weather, bright and accompanied by a soft breeze, as if nature itself was orchestrating the scene for a flawless family reunion. I chose the longer path to my parents' estate, using the drive to mentally prepare assured replies for the expected inquiries about my private life, my career path, and my absence of a husband or children at the mature age of 32. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I turned onto the well-known driveway lined with maples. It was already partially occupied by luxury vehicles belonging to extended relatives and my father's business partners, who, for some reason, always received invitations to these supposedly close family events. I noticed the Mercedes I had given him was prominently displayed near the main entrance instead of parked in its usual garage spot from the previous day, strategically placed where arriving guests could not overlook it. Taking a steadying breath, I smoothed my dress, checked my makeup one last time, and strode toward the imposing front door with the practiced poise I had cultivated in male-dominated boardrooms. Mother greeted me, her face brightening with sincere affection as she hugged me, whispering, "You look beautiful, darling," followed by her usual comment, "Your father is in the back garden with the Peterson group," as if giving a weather update. The grand foyer was already teeming with relatives, included the usual blend of true family members, alongside my father's carefully selected group of connections who were treated as honorary participants in the Morgan clan. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, approached immediately with air kisses and a rapid succession of questions about my romantic life, while Uncle George offered a firm handshake, accompanied by a booming, "There is our Wall Street magician." I knew this would annoy my father if he heard it. Cousins, second cousins, and family friends moved around in familiar patterns, the same conversations recurring every year with minor updates, everyone playing their designated part in the Morgan family performance. My father's arrival was exactly as expected. He entered from the garden with three business associates, all laughing at something probably only mildly amusing, but considered hilarious because of the speaker's net worth. His eyes scanned the room, acknowledging various guests with nods and brief greetings before settling on me. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by a quick tightening of his lips before he nodded out of obligation, as he always did with distant relatives. Then he walked over to Mother to whisper something in her ear, offering no special greeting to me, his middle child, the daughter who had just given him a car worth more than most people earn in a year. I tried not to react, focusing instead on conversing with my cousin Rachel about her medical residency, but the familiar sting remained. Dismissal faded quickly as my mother appeared beside me within moments, lightly touching my arm. Darling, your father said you bought a new car for him. How incredibly generous, she remarked, her eyes showing a blend of gratitude and worry over the lavishness. Please come meet the Stevensons. They just returned from a financial seminar in Singapore and are eager for your opinions. This was Mother's way, constantly stepping in, smoothing social situations, creating excuses for encounters that should naturally happen among family members. Jason showed up fashionably late as usual, arriving with his flawless wife, Rebecca, and their two perfect kids, receiving the warm fatherly hug I had spent years trying to earn. The new car is unbelievable. When did you decide to upgrade? He asked, and I watched stunned as my father patted him on the shoulder, replying, Sometimes you have to reward yourself, son. Success brings privileges with no hint of the gift or my part in it. Sarah caught me before I could react to this obvious dismissal, pulling me into a heartfelt embrace that lasted long enough to show her understanding. I heard about your promotion. That is fantastic. Liz, truly groundbreaking, she whispered, using my childhood nickname that nobody else used anymore. Her honesty was comforting, but the difference compared to our father's apathy was striking. As appetizers were passed around by hired staff, I noticed my father leading a group of his business partners toward the front entrance, gesturing animatedly through the large bay windows. I saw him showing off the Mercedes, opening its doors and pointing out its features, his face glowing with a pride I had never witnessed before. He has been doing that all morning, Sarah murmured, suddenly appearing at my side with a glass of wine, which I gratefully accepted. 3 separate tours for different groups of his buddies, she added. My mother told me you bought it for him. That was incredibly generous, Emily. I sipped the wine, watching my father settle into the driver's seat and invite one of his associates to enjoy the passenger side luxury. Generosity was not my true motive, I admitted quietly. For once, I just wanted him to recognize me as successful, as someone worthy of acknowledgement. Pathetic, right? Sarah squeezed my arm and said, Not pathetic human, but Emily, you need to understand. She hesitated, carefully choosing her words. Your dad will never give you what you are looking for. It's not because you don't deserve it, but because he simply cannot. Something about him is broken when it comes to you in particular. Her words struck with unexpected power, not because they were new to me, but because hearing someone else articulate the dynamic I had endured my entire life made it feel suddenly real in a painfully vivid way. Private thoughts never carried the burden of the paternity test tucked inside my purse, which seemed to make the sealed envelope weigh twice as much. It was like a ticking bomb that I simultaneously wanted to explode and was desperate to keep contained. The hour before dinner moved forward with the familiar cadence of Morgan family gatherings, everyone drifting toward the formal living room, furnished uncomfortably with antiques and decorated in a style aggressively tasteful, chosen by mother but approved by father, who ruled this one domestic kingdom without question. I settled myself on a windowsill slightly apart from the main group, sipping a second glass of wine while watching the usual family interactions with a fresh perspective. The awareness of my genetic difference created an almost anthropological distance, Jason naturally held the spotlight, captivating the family with stories of his newest real estate venture, a struggling shopping center he intended to convert into high-end condos. The initial investment seems risky to my partners, but I spotted potential they didn't see, he shared, as our father nodded in approval from his leather armchair, throwing in, "That is the Morgan instinct," he said proudly, "to find opportunity where others only sense failure. It runs in the blood." The irony of his comment struck me deeply, while the invisible weight of the envelope in my purse grew heavier with every claim tied by blood. The conversation naturally turned towards me as Jason finished his boastful speech. "Emily, Robert mentioned that you have advanced in your company," my Uncle Robert said with sincere curiosity in his tone. "Senior investment strategist, correct? Quite an achievement for someone your age." Before I could reply, my father interrupted, clearing his throat. "It is a decent stepping stone. The financial industry is unpredictable, though. It always has been. It is not like owning something solid such as real estate." He then faced Jason. "Tangible assets endure market changes. They last through generations." The familiar dismissal stung, even though I had expected it. The purposeful shift back to Jason and real estate, the subtle belittlement of my professional choice, sparked me to summon the authoritative voice I reserve for challenging client discussions. My division produced 30.8% returns last quarter, surpassing the market by 22 points during notable instability. "The risk analysis system I created has been implemented across the company," I declared. There was a brief pause filled with impressed silence before my father waved it off. "Numbers on a page. When the next downturn comes, we will see how well that performs." Turning to his colleague Henry, he asked, "Regarding property values, what are your thoughts on the new zoning regulations in the Cambridge area?" I excused myself to get another drink and ran into Sarah in the corridor as she was returning from tending to her husband, who was watching the children. "The backyard. Don't let him get under your skin," she whispered, gripping my arm tightly. "I caught wind of something about your model from Michael's cousin, who works in finance. It is said to be groundbreaking." Her affirmation gave me a small thrill, even though I realized how desperate it was to still need that kind of validation. As I moved closer to the bar area, I overheard my father's voice coming through the slightly open door of his adjoining study. "The car, yes, quite the upgrade compared to the old one. When you strive hard and build something from the ground up like I have, you deserve these privileges," said the male voice, which I knew belonged to Walter Peterson, my father's longtime business competitor and occasional partner. "Robert, you old fox, never one for modesty. Your daughter Emily mentioned she got it for you," Walter added with a chuckle. "When we spoke earlier, she said something about a promotion. Seems she is carving out a solid reputation for herself in New York," he continued. A brief pause followed before my father answered, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, well, the girl has always been hungry for attention. The truth is, her achievements come from the chances I offered, private schools, college connections, and the core business knowledge I passed on to all my children. The car is simply her way of proving she is finally putting my lessons into practice." His casual dismissal of my efforts, as if my independence were a result of his influence, despite his constant criticism, sent a wave of fury through me so strong I nearly dropped my glass. The conversation went on with my father, explaining how he always pushed Emily more than the others because she required that extra level of discipline. He portrayed himself as the mastermind behind all her accomplishments, yet dismissed my achievements, withdrawing before being exposed. His anger transformed into a cold, sharp fury as we stood in the main hallway. Jason stopped me, his face unusually serious, saying, "Emily, a word." He led me to a quiet spot beside Catherine's cherished orchid collection. Dad mentioned you've been asking Mother strange questions about her college days. What exactly are you searching for? His forthrightness surprised me. Honestly, after the DNA test, I had casually asked about Mother's life prior to marriage, hoping to find clues about possible relationships, but I assumed my inquiries were discreet, merely trying to understand her better. I answered carefully. Women of her generation rarely had many chances to shape their own identities before settling down and having children. Jason examined me with the same analytical stare that belonged to our father. The family resemblance was striking, making me feel even more excluded. He said, "Look, whatever you're up to, whatever point you're trying to make with lavish gifts and intrusive questions, just stop. This family runs on a certain order, a harmony. Don't upset that with whatever drama you're stirring up." His condescending tone mirrored my father's so perfectly that I almost laughed. Harmony? Is that how you define this poisonous hierarchy, this rigid system? In a situation where one person's achievements are praised while another's are diminished, I'm not inventing anything, Jason. I'm simply beginning to understand the truth more clearly, he said, moving closer and lowering his voice to avoid attracting attention. Our father is the architect of everything we possess. The Morgan name carries weight because of his efforts. Your prestigious position in New York and your stylish apartment all originate from the solid groundwork he laid, so show some appreciation and respect for him. Before I could reply, our cousin Rachel came over, apparently sensing the tension. Is everything all right here? Aunt Catherine is looking for both of you. I believe dinner is about to be announced. Jason forced a public smile, the flawless facade of a sunny persona settling back into place effortlessly. Just catching up with my little sister business matters nothing important, he said as he walked away. Rachel gently touched my arm and said, "You know my mother always claims your father treats favorites like it is an Olympic sport he is determined to interfere. For what it is worth, I think what you have achieved independently is quite remarkable." Her quiet encouragement nearly shattered the calm control I had struggled to keep. I had spent countless years convincing myself that the problem was my interpretation, not reality, so having someone else recognize the situation was both reassuring and heartbreaking. The dinner bell rang, signaling Mother's cue for everyone to make their way to the formal dining room. I stayed behind for a moment, my fingers lightly grazing the surface. The outline of the envelope resting in my purse weighed heavily as I considered the options and potential outcomes. A part of me longed to leave at once, to escape this charade of family togetherness and shield myself from the inevitable pain the evening was sure to bring. Yet, a stronger, perhaps more self-punishing part resisted retreating, determined to endure and face the lifetime of rejection with tangible proof of its origin. I examined the envelope one last time, making sure the test results remained securely enclosed within, then squared my shoulders and walked toward the dining room, bracing myself for the ordeal that awaited. The Morgan formal dining room had always seemed like the perfect symbol of our family dynamic. Its grand mahogany table accommodated 20, yet managed to feel unwelcoming and cold. Ancestral portraits observed us silently from the walls, judging without mercy. The elaborate place settings valued appearance above comfort, much like every detail in my father's meticulously arranged world. Mother had truly surpassed herself this time with the table decorations, crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier's glow, fresh flowers placed with precise spacing, and name cards written in flawless calligraphy, assigning each guest their rigid place within the family's hierarchy. My card was, as expected, positioned far down the table, seated between Cousin Rachel's husband, whom I had scarcely met, and one of Father's junior business associates, safely kept at a distance. In any significant gathering, Jason and his family held the most important spots near Robert at the head of the table, with Sarah and her husband positioned as intermediaries between the core family and more distant relatives. Catherine sat at the opposite end, her place serving as a clear symbol of her role in the family, formally equal but physically separated by the length of the table, connected yet apart. The first course was brought out with precise coordination as the waitstaff placed delicate appetizers of seared scallops garnished with microgreens before each guest at the same moment. Robert raised his glass of rosé and instantly commanded silence without saying a word. "Welcome, family and friends, to our annual reunion," he began with practiced warmth, his public demeanor polished like a mirror. "Every year I remember how lucky I am to have created not just a thriving business, but a legacy reflected in my family," he declared, casting a proud look at Jason, who nodded with gratitude, then at Sarah, who smiled warmly, before moving past me as if I were invisible. "A special welcome to the Peterson Group joining us this year," he added, acknowledging his business partners. "When surrounded by success, one naturally attracts more success." The toast continued with Robert highlighting Jason's recent business growth, Sarah's new role on the community board, and closing with a sharp remark that family achievement is rooted in following well-established paths rather than venturing into the unknown. Challenging outdated customs unnecessarily, his gaze briefly settled on me with unmistakable intent. As the dinner moved through 5 intricate courses, my father steered the conversation with subtle gestures and pointed inquiries, making sure topics stayed within his favored areas, such as real estate markets, local politics where he wielded influence, and occasional sports discussions designed to highlight Jason's past athletic accomplishments. When my mother gently tried to bring up my recent promotion, my father quickly diverted the topic, asking Henry about his opinion on the Federal Reserve's recent signals, effectively dismissing her attempt without even acknowledging it had happened. By the time the fish course arrived, the familiar pattern was evident, with my father consistently tossing sharp questions my way, intended more to destabilize than to engage. "Emily, your company mostly manages domestic investments, yes? That seems quite limiting given the opportunities for global growth, and I believe your promotion came after the Davidson account. Lucky that Jason introduced you to William Davidson at last year's charity event." Every remark was carefully crafted to downplay any of my achievements, framing them as narrow in scope or reliant on family ties. I consciously avoided using "I" and held on to the calm, professional composure I had refined in cutthroat boardrooms, determined not to reveal the emotional response he clearly wanted to provoke. During the previous quarter, my international division integrated the risk assessment framework I developed, and the Davidson account was secured through a pitch competition without any prior introductions. My revisions were executed with practiced ease, but I noticed Sarah casting sympathetic glances during each exchange, a silent support amid the tension. The familiar family ritual unfolded, painful due to its predictable nature. The main dish was an overly intricate beef Wellington, demanding full attention for several minutes and offering a brief escape from the tense conversation. Taking advantage of this pause, Robert opened another bottle of very costly wine, his drinking steadily increasing throughout the meal, a worrying trend that Catherine quietly observed with anxious looks. Jason leaned over to whisper something in Robert's ear, but was met with a dismissive wave. As coffee and dessert arrived, Robert's focus returned to me, his condition less guarded because of the alcohol. "Emily, Robert mentions you are still single," Mrs. Peterson said with sincere curiosity. "Such an elegant and accomplished young woman, the men in New York must feel daunted." Before I could reply politely about prioritizing career goals, Robert interrupted. "Emily has always been more intent on proving herself than creating something meaningful," he said, swirling his bourbon thoughtfully. "Some people pursue achievements to fill other emptiness. Family demands compromise, something the Women in the Morgan family have always grasped better than I the quiet harshness delivered with practiced accuracy, suggesting that my career achievements were merely a consolation for personal shortcomings rather than accomplishments in their own right. Mother's sharp intake of breath was audible even from where I sat at the far end of the table. Robert began with unusual firmness, but carried on as though she had not spoken. Maybe if Emily had shown greater interest in the suitable prospects I had introduced over the years, instead of dismissing them as dull or conventional, she would not now be entering her 30s alone. Every word was chosen with precision to maximize impact. The public examination of my life choices disguised as fatherly concern rather than the harsh judgment it truly was. The familiar pressure built behind my eyes, the childhood impulse to escape the table battling with the adult resolve to keep my composure. I took a careful sip of water, observing with detached curiosity that my hand remained steady despite the emotional storm beneath. I value your concern for my personal happiness, Father, I replied calmly, drawing on all the negotiation skills I had ever mastered. But as you have often pointed out, Morgan's priority is results, and my results speak clearly for themselves. A strained quiet settled over the table, with relatives who had witnessed similar confrontations over the years, diligently avoiding eye contact and focusing on their desserts while father's business continued. The colleagues shifted restlessly, suddenly showing keen interest in the intricate design of the ceiling. A tightening sensation in my chest grew with every beat of my heart. This was the culmination of countless moments like these, public humiliations disguised as family concern, subtle attempts to erase my identity and accomplishments. The envelope inside my purse seemed to throb with dormant power, a last resort that I had promised both myself and Taylor never to use. As the waitstaff cleared away the dessert plates, I realized with absolute certainty that this path could not continue. Trying to gain approval from a man who was inherently inclined to withhold it was a destructive pattern I could no longer endure. As coffee cups were being topped up and brandy was offered to bring the elaborate meal to a close, Robert leaned back slightly in his chair. This subtle gesture was universally understood by everyone present as the prelude to one of his spontaneous speeches, a ritual that had developed over many of the Morgans' gatherings. An expectant hush fell instantly. Conversation stopped mid-word, utensils were carefully set down, and all eyes naturally turned to the family head. Robert stood, holding his brandy glass, his expression adopting the calm authority he reserved for these public moments. Before we move on to the garden for our annual family photo, he began with a tone typical of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Used to commanding attention in rooms, he said, I want to take a moment to express how proud I am of what the Morgan family continues to create together. He gestured broadly, including the business partners as honorary members of this so-called dynasty. A family is like a business venture, requiring vision, leadership, and participants who understand their roles in achieving shared success. His gaze swept across the table in that practiced manner, appearing to meet everyone's eyes, but truly connecting with none. As I look around this table, I am reminded how fortunate I am to have children who contribute to the family legacy in deeply meaningful ways, he said, turning toward Jason as he raised his glass slightly. Jason, your business insight continues to impress not only me but the entire Boston development scene. The Riverside project is exactly the kind of bold, forward-thinking strategy that sets Morgan projects apart from lesser endeavors. You have not just embraced the lessons I taught you, but you have taken them to a higher level. Jason nodded, showing a crafted humility that barely hid his pride as the golden child receiving his deserved praise. The father then shifted his attention toward Sarah, his expression growing warmer. Sarah, Your elegance in balancing family duties with leadership in the community reflects exceptional maturity. Your work with the Children's Hospital Board has brought true. The prestige tied to the Morgan name serves as a constant reminder that true achievement involves giving back. My mother and I could not feel prouder of the family you are nurturing and the principles you uphold. Sarah's smile was sincere, although slightly uneasy under the spotlight, always more at ease helping others receive praise than seeking it herself. I prepared myself for the inevitable moment, the deliberate exclusion, the pointed silence where my name should have been, a practiced method of offering praise through omission that spoke volumes to everyone present without direct criticism. What occurred instead was even more unbearable. Father's gaze finally fixed on me, the subtle narrowing of his eyes revealing the deliberate nature of what was to come. As I consider my children's achievements, he said, his voice shifting in tone to what some might mistake for thoughtfulness when it was actually the calm before a strike, I find myself struck by how differently success can be perceived. He took a measured sip of brandy, pausing dramatically to heighten the tension. I am proud of all my children, he declared, lifting his glass higher. For a fleeting second, a foolish spark of hope flickered within me, swiftly snuffed out by his next words. Except for the failure sitting at this table. His words landed with cruel precision, followed by a stunned silence before uneasy laughter stirred among those present. Among the guests, most assumed this must be some private family joke rather than the harsh public criticism it truly was. I felt warmth flood my cheeks and then vanish completely, leaving behind a chilling numbness as every pair of eyes at the table shifted toward me, with looks ranging from discomfort to pity to grim fascination. Father kept speaking as if he had made a harmless comment about the weather. Some people judge success by titles and paychecks or by superficial accomplishments that might impress on paper but lack real meaning and durability. Genuine success comes from honoring family legacies, from building on established foundations instead of constantly trying to prove one's worth alone at the cost of the group's strength. The deliberate ambiguity fooled no one. Everyone knew exactly who he meant. Mother's face drained of color, her knuckles pale as she gripped her napkin, while Jason wore a satisfied smirk and Sarah showed clear embarrassment. Cousin Rachel reached over her husband to quietly touch my arm in support, but I hardly noticed. My entire awareness shrank to a laser focus on the man at the head of the table, who had just echoed what the DNA test had already revealed, that in his eyes, I was essentially different, not truly a part of this family. For what felt like endless moments, I stood paralyzed, overwhelmed by the stinging reality of humiliation and rejection. A sense of clinical detachment washed over me as I felt the burning flush across my face and the tightening in my throat accompanied by a racing heartbeat. The fight or flight mechanism surged through my body with adrenaline, triggering memories of countless similar experiences, a relentless series of public rebukes, subtle dismissals, and achievements recast as failures played across my mind like an ongoing slideshow. Each incident compounded the overarching message that I was inherently inadequate, unworthy of the name I bore, a name that genetic science had recently proven I did not even have the right to claim. Robert Morgan ended his speech with some hollow remark about family unity, which felt empty after his pointed exclusion. Something shifted irrevocably inside me, severing the last fragile connection between the desperate child craving approval and the adult woman who suddenly saw with unerring clarity how pointless that quest had been. The weight of the envelope in my purse changed from being a heavy burden to a symbol of freedom. its contents ceased to be a humiliating secret and instead became a key opening the prison of false expectations that had confined me for my entire life. The room remained thick with uncomfortable silence, as if awaiting my response, perhaps expecting tears or a quick exit, like in previous years when familiar family conflicts concluded predictably. But instead, an unexpected serenity settled over me, bringing sharp clarity to my purpose. This decision must have been inevitable since the moment the test results arrived, clear and unavoidable. While meticulously orchestrating my next move, I found myself standing with such fluid and intentional grace that it captured everyone's immediate focus. Conversations abruptly paused as all eyes shifted to me, showing a mix of intrigue and unease, the latter mostly from those familiar with past Morgan family disputes. My champagne glass stayed firmly on the table, signaling my refusal to join the toast, making a clear statement. I smoothed my dress with calm hands, amazed by the serenity that had replaced my earlier inner chaos, as if I had entered the calm center of a storm. Thank you, Father, for your enlightening remarks, I began, with a voice that carried effortlessly and confidently, using the polished tone I've honed in countless boardroom meetings, now proving invaluable in this unforeseen moment. I have spent 32 years seeking approval that was never meant to be given, constantly measuring myself against shifting standards that moved whenever I seemed close to meeting them. Today, I finally understand why the room has become utterly silent, that heavy stillness that signals a turning point. Mother's face showed clear concern, while Father's expression grew somber, realizing this conversation was not unfolding as he expected. For those keeping track, I proceeded with a lightness that contrasted sharply with the significance of my words. I graduated at the very top of my class from Cornell. I built my career without any family connections and recently became the youngest senior investment strategist in my company's history. By most objective standards, this hardly fits the label of a failure. I allowed my eyes to sweep across the table, catching brief glances from several relatives who subtly nodded in recognition before I redirected my focus to my father. Yet success in Robert Morgan's world has never been about measurable accomplishments. It has always revolved around conforming to his particular vision, about reflecting glory back to him instead of forging your own path. With deliberate calm, I reached for my purse, fully aware that each of my movements was being intensely scrutinized. The unusual sight of the obedient middle child finally stepping out of line was impossible to ignore. I looked directly at my father and said, "I bought you a car worth more than most people earn in a year." His expression hardened into the cold mask he wore during business talks when things did not go his way. It was not because he needed the car or even truly deserved it, but because I still clung to the childish hope that a grand enough gesture might finally close the mysterious distance that had existed between us my whole life. From my purse, I pulled out an envelope containing the paternity test results, the plainness of the paper contrasting sharply with the weight of its content. For 3 decades, I had blamed myself for Robert Morgan's inability to show me the same affection he showed Jason and Sarah. I bent myself into endless forms, hoping to become someone who would finally gain your approval, which never came. It dawned on me that the issue was not my behavior, but something deeper, rooted in my very being. A collective gasp swept around the table as the weight of my words sank in. My mother's face paled entirely while Jason straightened up, suddenly alert. I set the envelope exactly at the table's center, moving with calm precision. "For you, Dad, Happy Father's Day," I said quietly, lacing the phrase with all the irony this moment demanded. Without waiting for any reply, I left the dining room, walking back with steady steps, unhurried, holding on to the dignity that had been methodically taken from me over the course of the evening. The stunned silence stretched until I reached the foyer in the hallway, then erupted into a flurry of voices and overlapping questions that turned into incomprehensible noise. I stepped outside without a pause. The evening air was cool against my warm skin. Lanterns lit the path to the driveway, casting soft pools of light in the approaching twilight. The Mercedes was parked where Dad had placed it for everyone to see. Its shiny black surface mirrored the house lights, a symbol of everything I had been trying to buy with money that should have gone into something of my own. The choice was less deliberate and more unavoidable as my hand instinctively reached for the spare key. In my purse, I had kept the remote unlock device that responded with a soft chirp, a sound oddly too cheerful for the situation. As I settled into the driver's seat, the leather interior still carried that new car scent mingled faintly with traces of my father's cologne, a sensory reminder of his brief ownership that would soon vanish. Through the windshield, I noticed figures gathering at the dining room windows, shadowy outlines moving expressively. The family drama now fully ignited by my leaving and revelation. The engine started smoothly with a refined hum, the dashboard lights welcoming me as though nothing significant had happened, as if this were just another drive instead of a final departure from 32 years of emotional bondage. Backing down the driveway, I caught sight of the front door flung open, my father's silhouette framed by the light, one hand gripping what looked like an opened envelope. His mouth was open as if calling my name, but his words were swallowed by the gentle growl of the German-engineered car. The symmetry struck me deeply as I sped away, the luxury vehicle he had once flaunted to colleagues, while downplaying my role now physically separated me, just as he had tried to diminish my existence for 3 decades. Both acts of erasure met in perfect narrative harmony. This realization transformed what had been an instinctive move into a deliberate choice, reclaiming the gift alongside the restoration of my self-worth. I was simultaneously embarking on a new path, free from the weight of gratitude that had never been given. In the rearview mirror, the Morgan estate grew smaller with every passing moment, its grandeur fading as the emotional grip it held on me loosened with each rotation of the wheels beneath me. The sensation spreading through my chest was not quite joy, too intricate and tinged with sorrow for such a simple word, but rather an unfamiliar feeling of freedom. Freedom of choice, suddenly unbound by the heavy influence of paternal approval that had warped my trajectory for as long as I could recall. The Mercedes responded with quiet precision as I steered away from the neighborhood of my youth, each turn widening the gap between who I was 30 minutes ago and the person I was becoming. I nearly reached the highway entrance when the first call came through on my cell phone, Sarah's name illuminating the dashboard, quickly followed by Jason, my mother, and several cousins, a digital record of the turmoil I had left behind. I silenced the ring but did not switch off the phone completely, some part of me needing to observe the consequences, even if I was still unready to face them head on. As I merged onto the highway toward Boston instead of returning to New York, I allowed myself a quick glance in the rearview mirror just as a male figure I instantly recognized as my father hurried into view. The street behind me revealed his usually calm face, twisted into an expression I had never witnessed before, something far beyond anger, into a feeling I could not immediately understand. The distance was too great to catch his voice, yet I did not need sound to recognize his scream solely by his posture. His arms were raised above his head in a raw display of emotion that momentarily made him unrecognizable as the controlled family head who had orchestrated years of emotional manipulation. That image imprinted itself on my memory as I hurried away, a vivid symbol of the profound change that had just taken place. The carefully built family story shattered irreparably through 3 pages of scientific evidence and a single instant of absolute understanding. By the time I arrived at a hotel in downtown Boston half an hour later, my phone showed 17 missed calls and 29 texts, the digital aftermath of the explosion I had triggered before walking off. Placing the room key on the desk, I kicked off my shoes and finally allowed myself to read the messages, starting with Sarah's texts. They evolved from confusion. What just happened? What was in that envelope? To worry, Elizabeth, please call me. Everyone is freaking out to updates. Dad is saying crazy things. Mom locked herself in her room. Jason is threatening legal action over the car. Catherine's voice messages began calmly, but quickly worsened. The first, a soft, "Emily, please call home when you." She sent a message, her voice trembling with emotion as she expressed, "This cannot be correct. There has to be some error. Please come back so we can talk this through as a family." Jason limited himself to only 2 texts, which both threatened legal measures if I did not return father's belongings at once and withdraw your offensive accusations. The stark difference between my siblings' replies was not surprising since their responses fit perfectly with the roles they had always taken within our family dynamic. I sat at the edge of the hotel bed, phone in hand, the physical and emotional distance from the reunion giving me space to absorb what had happened with unexpected clarity. The paternity results had confirmed what a deep, intuitive part of me might have always suspected. Robert Morgan was not my biological father. His emotional detachment throughout my life now made sense, rooted in a secret he carried but never revealed. I had obtained the test on impulse after learning from a recreational genetic screening service that the paternal genetic markers I expected to see did not match. The initial shock gave way to a strange feeling of clarity, an explanation for feeling like an outsider in my own family for so long. Now that this truth was out in the open, the carefully preserved family facade was unraveling rapidly, decades of deception collapsing under undeniable scientific evidence. This was the most revealing moment of all. The reply arrived almost 2 hours later, after I had showered and changed into the clothes I had packed in my overnight bag, just in case the reunion became unbearable. That preparation now seemed unnecessary. My phone lit up with Sarah's number, and I felt a strong need to hear at least one family member's voice to confirm that the earthquake I had caused was real and not merely a figment of my imagination. "Emily." Sarah's voice was quiet, indicating she was calling from a private spot inside the house, still crowded with relatives. "Are you all right? Where are you?" The sincere worry in her voice almost broke my carefully guarded calm. "I'm safe," I replied, keeping it vague. "What is going on there?" She let out a long breath. "Complete chaos, a total breakdown, the moment after you left," she said. Robert opened the letter at the table, right in front of everyone, read it for about half a minute, then started yelling for Catherine. She glanced at the letter and turned ghostly pale. They retreated into his study for around 10 minutes, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. Robert then burst out, "Looking for you, noticed the car was gone, and completely lost control." I had never seen him like that before, Emily. Despite the clinical tone of her description, it almost helped me keep my emotions at bay, treating the disaster like a case study rather than my own world crumbling. "And Mother?" I asked, both dreading and needing to hear. She locked herself inside their bedroom and refused to speak to anyone, not even Jason. As you might expect, the guests left quite soon after that. Meanwhile, Dad has been making phone calls in his office for over an hour now. Jason keeps mentioning some kind of legal order concerning the car, though honestly, that feels like the least pressing matter at this moment. She hesitated, lowering her voice even more. "Emily, is it true about the test results? Are they legitimate?" The question held no accusation, only a sincere wish to comprehend, so typical of Sarah's role as a peacemaker. "Yes, I confirmed it. I had the test done after a genetic company noticed some discrepancies. Robert Morgan is not my biological father. Speaking these words aloud to a family member made them suddenly vivid and undeniable in a way that merely knowing in private had not. Do you know who the father is? Sarah asked quietly. The test does not reveal that. It only confirms the mismatch with the sample I gave from Dad's hairbrush, I explained. The scientific details felt easier to discuss than the emotional weight of it all. Considering the timing and Mom's reaction, I suspect it was someone from before she married Dad. Sarah paused briefly before asking a question that showed her usual emotional insight. How long do you think he has known? That question struck at the core of everything. The real betrayal was not that biological truth, but the many years of emotional suffering for a reality beyond my control. Throughout my entire life with me, I replied with a certainty that even took me by surprise. It clarifies everything, Sarah. Every harsh remark, every unfavorable comparison, every unrealistic expectation, he was not trying to improve me. He was punishing me simply for existing. The truth of this realization settled quietly between us without the need to voice the countless instances that proved it. I must leave Sarah, she said abruptly. Jason is coming upstairs, and I do not want him to overhear our conversation. Just please send me a message confirming you are safe wherever you may be. And Emily, no matter what happens next, I love you. Her words settled deeply within me, an unexpected reassurance, breaking through the numbness I had guarded since leaving the house. After ending the call, I turned to the hotel window overlooking Boston Harbor, the city lights shimmering on the dark water, the scene both familiar and strange, much like my own reflection in the glass. Somewhere in that city lived the man who had shaped my childhood through his deliberate emotional absence, and possibly also the unknown man whose DNA I carried. The symmetry of these two fathers, one present yet emotionally distant, the other completely unknown but biologically linked, brought about a curious sense of balance, as though the universe had finally offered a reason for the constant feeling of being out of place I had carried all my life as midnight approached. A final message came from an unexpected source, my mother's seldom used private number for direct contact. She said, I never intended for you to learn this way. It was not an affair. There was someone before your father back in college. When I found out I was pregnant, your father agreed to marry me anyway, so you could carry his name. Please trust that he tried to love you as his own. Some men simply cannot separate emotions from biology. I failed you both by acting as if the truth did not matter. Can we meet tomorrow, just the two of us? There is so much you need to understand. The message confirmed what I had already suspected, but introduced new complexities I had not anticipated. It made my father appear simultaneously as both a villain and a victim of his own shortcomings, and my mother as both a deceiver and a trapped young woman forced into impossible choices in a less forgiving time than today. I set the phone down on the nightstand without replying, the emotional fatigue finally overtaking the adrenaline that had carried me through the evening. Tomorrow would bring decisions about how much truth I was willing to accept, what level of connection I could recover, or whether it was even worth pursuing, and what direction my life would take now that the core motivation of seeking paternal approval had been irrevocably removed. For tonight, I gave myself permission to shut down emotionally and enjoy a night of dreamless sleep, free from the lifelong questioning that had led to this day of revelations and the week that followed, which my mind labeled as the period after the unveiling. The experience unfolded with an unusual blend of feeling painfully slow and astonishingly fast at the same time, each day bringing new information that both clarified and complicated my sense of belonging in the world. The morning after my intense departure, I met my mother at a small cafe far from familiar family places. Her appearance startled me with its openness, the carefully maintained Matthews matriarch image completely gone, replaced by a woman who seemed older and more genuinely human than I had ever seen before. His name was Thomas Keller, she began directly, her fingers trembling gently around the porcelain cup as soon as our coffee arrived. We met during our junior year at Wellesley. He was studying engineering at MIT, brilliant and kind, but entirely unsuitable for a girl from my background, she said. According to my parents, when they found out about our relationship, they forbade it immediately. 2 months later, I met your father at a charity event, the appropriate match everyone approved of, she continued. The story unfolded like a classic period drama. A young woman pressured to give up a true connection for social advancement, discovering her pregnancy only after the relationship was forcibly ended. Robert Morgan offered marriage partly out of true affection and partly as a strategic move, seeing how Catherine's family ties would benefit his business goals. She promised to raise you as his own, my mother explained, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the present. The past remained alive, and I believe he sincerely meant to honor that promise, but from the moment you entered the world, you inherited Thomas's eyes, his facial expressions, his habit of questioning everything instead of blindly accepting what was told to you. Robert attempted in his own way, but whenever he looked at you, he saw the child of a different man, tangible evidence of a life before him. The revelations poured out for over 3 hours, detailing a history I had never imagined, unfolding with painful clarity that explained the family dynamics shaping my existence. My biological father had never been aware of me. He relocated to California after graduating, established a prosperous engineering company, married and fathered 3 children who were technically my half-siblings. My mother had observed his life from a distance through alumni newsletters and more recently social media, but never reached out, respecting the promise made to Robert that the past would stay hidden, that I would carry the Matthews name in title, if not in blood. By our third cup of coffee, we arrived at the toughest question. Why did you never shield me? I asked, unleashing the weight of decades of pain condensed into this single demand. You observed how he treated me compared to Jason and Sarah? You witnessed him deliberately dismiss every success, every effort to win his approval. So how could you allow that to persist for 30 years? Her face crumbled with sorrow so intense it temporarily drowned out my anger. I failed you, she confessed, her voice heavy with regret. Every time I thought about telling you the truth, I found excuses explaining why he could not give you what you truly deserved. The moment never felt right, and the possible harm seemed too great. Then time went by, and the lie became bigger, more difficult to fix. I convinced myself that you were strong and resilient, that you were creating a life on your own without needing his approval. It was only yesterday that I realized how deeply that pursuit still influenced you. The conversation ended without a clear solution, marking only the start of a more sincere relationship that would take years to rebuild based on honesty. The next day brought a major shift when I received an email from Thomas Keller, my biological father, in reply to the message I had sent. After confirming his identity through public records, his answer was cautious but kind. He was surprised to discover I existed and asked for some time to process this news, yet showed a genuine desire to connect. He wrote, I saw in your email signature that you work in finance in New York. Ironically, I will be in Manhattan next month for a conference. Perhaps we could meet for coffee if you feel comfortable. This simple recognition of my career, without judgment or comparison, soothed my emotional pain. The neutral respect in his words opened up possibilities for a connection free from the complicated Morgan family history. These deeply personal upheavals reshaped my comprehension of family. Meanwhile, the professional world continued spinning with a practical disregard for my inner turmoil. My supervisor contacted me midweek with inquiries regarding a client presentation. The routine nature of work conversations offered unexpected solace amidst the personal disorder. She told me that the Richardson account requires me to explain the risk assessment model face to face. They are specifically asking for you by name, Emily. Your reputation is expanding. This recognition of my professional worth, independent from family ties, reaffirmed what should have been clear all along, that my value stands apart from the Morgan name or their approval, grounded completely in my own skills and integrity. Robert made his initial direct approach 6 days following the reunion through his lawyer, sending a detached formal letter demanding the return of the Mercedes and threatening legal proceedings over public statements about paternity. The stark contrast between his response and Jason's cautious but compassionate email clarified everything I needed to understand about these two men. Suddenly, genetics seemed far less important than character in establishing true parentage. I instructed my lawyer to organize the vehicle's return, while making explicit that DNA evidence cannot be considered defamatory by definition. Jason remained completely silent, his allegiance to his father unsurprising given their genuine biological link and shared perspective. However, Sarah called daily, her concern unwavering. Our bond grew stronger as we finally engaged in sincere discussions about the family issues we had both noticed but never openly addressed before. He has controlled the story of our lives from the beginning, she mentioned during a late-night call, forcing us to compete for approval that was never fairly shared. I benefited from that system, yet I always understood how it hurt you. I am sorry I did not defend you more. Her admission began to mend wounds I had not realized were still raw. Receiving validation from someone who had lived through it was strangely more impactful than any medical result could have been. Half a year after the eye diagnosis, my world changed in many subtle and significant ways. Regular therapy sessions helped me unravel the complicated ties between conditional love and the fear of not meeting expectations, which had fueled my drive to succeed. This process allowed me to appreciate true achievement apart from frantic efforts to gain approval. My connection with my mother matured into something more sincere as she let go of her flawless act in exchange for honest and sometimes difficult conversations about decisions, their outcomes, and the deep love that had always existed behind the Morgan family facade. I met Thomas Keller for the first time at an unassuming restaurant close to Central Park, feeling a strange mixture of unease and comfort when I noticed my facial expressions and gestures reflected in a man I had never met before. You have inherited my mother's analytical mindset, he remarked during dessert several hours into a conversation that unfolded with unexpected fluidity. But the enthusiasm you show when discussing market trends seems to come from my side. Our relationship grew gradually, always mindful of its unconventional start, neither of us anticipating an instant father-daughter bond, but instead forging a connection through mutual intellectual pursuits and uncovering inherited traits that had never appeared in the Matthews family. The final element of this reshaped life puzzle slipped into place at Thanksgiving when I chose to accept Sarah's invitation to dine at her house instead of the usual event at our parents' estate. Robert had refused to attend once he learned I would be there. His ongoing rejection now evoked more sorrow than anger as my own recovery advanced. He is incapable of change, Sarah said while we worked on dessert together, her children playing nearby with her husband. It is not a choice. He honestly cannot, because his entire identity depends on beliefs that your existence contradicts. This statement held no blame, just an acknowledgement of the unchangeable truth we had both come to accept. After dinner, my mother spoke with a voice steadier than I remembered from my youth. the forced perfection replaced by sincere involvement. I am proud of you, Emily, she said. She said plainly, not about your job or your address or everything you have accomplished, even though those achievements are impressive. I am proud of who you truly are, your strength, your ability to find truth amid falsehoods. I wish I had said that to you every single day of your life. The words I had longed to hear from Robert for 30 years came without hesitation from the parent who had always cared for me despite her imperfections. Their unconditional nature brought a healing power unlike any before. As the call ended, I grasped the deepest lesson of these past 6 months. Family goes beyond blood ties and legal bonds. It is made up of those who see you clearly and love you regardless, who respect your genuine self instead of demanding you play assigned roles. The luxury car I had bought as a desperate gesture towards a father figure who never truly embraced me was now reclaimed and sold. The money was wisely invested in my future instead of wasted on a futile quest for approval that would never come. More importantly, I recovered the emotional strength previously drained by chasing impossible validation. I redirected that energy toward relationships that bring life and work driven by passion rather than a need to prove my value. I chose to build a life assessed by inner joy instead of external praise. The path from that pivotal family dinner to this fresh balance was neither straightforward nor easy, with new challenges arriving every day. Obstacles and occasional difficulties appeared along the way, but the path steadily led toward recovery instead of further harm. Perhaps the most profound indicator of progress did not come from dramatic moments, but from quiet Tuesday mornings when I woke up without immediately questioning my self-worth, when achievements were appreciated for their own sake rather than as a means to finally gain paternal approval, when life was lived on a genuine basis instead of desperate acting. As this Thanksgiving evening came to a close, I realized that although the mystery surrounding my father had been unraveled, the more important revelation was that its significance had lessened with each stride toward accepting myself. The question of whose blood flowed through me mattered far less than whose principles I chose to uphold, whose affection I embraced as true, whose reality I accepted as mine. Have you ever felt that your real family is not always defined by blood ties? Sometimes those expected to love us unconditionally end up wounding us most profoundly. I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below about how you formed your own family by choice or confronted those who failed to recognize your value. If my story touched you, please press that like button, subscribe for more stories of recovery, and share with someone who may need to remember that their worth does not rely on anyone else's approval. Thank you for listening. Remember that reclaiming your strength sometimes requires distancing yourself from those who were never worthy of it from the very beginning.